The morning sun cast long shadows across Terminal B at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport as Maria Santos adjusted her TSA uniform and prepared for another day of security screening. At 28, she had worked airport security for 6 years, and she thought she had seen everything. Businessmen rushing to catch flights, families struggling with oversized luggage, and the occasional celebrity trying to slip through unnoticed. But nothing had prepared her for what would unfold at Gate 17 that Tuesday morning in September. The first sign of trouble came at 6:47 a.m. when her supervisor, James Mitchell, approached her checkpoint with a concerned expression. Mitchell was a 15-year veteran of the Transportation Security Administration, a man who prided himself on running the most efficient security operation in the terminal. His graying hair and stern demeanor commanded respect from both his staff and the traveling public. "Maria, we've got a situation developing," Mitchell said, keeping his voice low as passengers moved through the nearby metal detectors. "There's a group of about 20 people coming through in the next hour. They look rough, real rough." Corporate called it in as a potential security concern. Maria nodded, her training kicking in immediately. She had handled difficult passengers before, but something in Mitchell's tone suggested this was different. "What kind of group are we talking about, sir?" "They came in on a red-eye from Los Angeles," Mitchell explained, glancing at his tablet. The gate agent who checked them and called them suspicious characters. Apparently, they're all traveling together but bought separate tickets. Some kind of reunion or gathering. The flight crew reported they kept to themselves during the flight, didn't cause any problems, but they looked like they just came off the street. As if summoned by their conversation, the group began to appear at the security checkpoint. Maria's first impression was that they looked like they had been through a war. 20 men and women, ranging in age from their early 20s to their 60s, approached the TSA checkpoint with a mixture of quiet dignity and visible weariness. Their clothes are clean but clearly worn with patches and repairs that spoke of hard living. Several walked with slight limps. Others bore scars that caught the fluorescent lighting. The first man in line was tall and lean, with prematurely gray hair and eyes that seemed to take in everything around him. Behind him, a woman in her 30s moved with the fluid grace of someone accustomed to physical challenges, despite the obvious fatigue in her posture. The rest of the group followed in a loose formation that somehow managed to look both casual and disciplined. "Good morning," the tall man said to Maria as he approached her station. His voice was calm and respectful, but there was something in his bearing that commanded attention. "We're traveling together to Washington, D.C. I'll need to see your identification and boarding passes," Maria replied, falling back on standard procedure. As she examined the documents, she noticed the man's California driver's license listed an address in a part of Los Angeles she knew was far from prosperous. Behind her, she could hear Mitchell speaking quietly into his radio. "Yeah, they're here now. Keep an eye on the situation, but maintain normal protocols unless something changes." The group moved through the initial document check without incident, but as they approached the metal detectors and X-ray machines, Maria began to notice details that made her increasingly uncomfortable. Their belongings were sparse: small duffel bags, worn backpacks, and in several cases, everything they owned seemed to fit in a single plastic grocery bag. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to remove your boots," Maria's colleague, Officer Thompson, said to the woman who had been second in line. Thompson was newer to the job, only 2 years in, and he had a tendency to be overly thorough in his screening procedures. The woman complied without complaint, but as she removed her boots, Maria caught sight of her socks. They were clean, but had been darned multiple times, the careful stitching speaking of someone who couldn't afford to replace worn items. More telling were her feet themselves, calloused and tough in a way that suggested long periods of walking on hard surfaces. "Sir, step through the detector," Thompson called to the tall man. The metal detector immediately sounded its alarm, and Thompson's hand moved instinctively toward his radio. "Please step back and empty your pockets completely." The man complied without protest, removing a small collection of items that painted a picture of someone living on the margins. A few crumpled dollar bills, some coins, a worn wallet that looked like it had been through a washing machine, and a small metal object that Thompson immediately flagged for closer inspection. "What is this?" Thompson asked, holding up what appeared to be a military challenge coin. "It's from my unit," the man replied simply. 101st Airborne. I served in Afghanistan." Thompson examined the coin suspiciously, as if it might be some kind of weapon or contraband. Around him, other members of the group were going through similar screenings, each revealing small pieces of a larger puzzle that Maria was beginning to piece together. These weren't suspicious characters or potential threats. They were veterans. The realization hit her like a physical blow. The worn clothes, the disciplined way they moved, the quiet dignity in the face of suspicion. It all made sense now. These were men and women who had served their country, and from the looks of things, they were struggling to find their place in civilian life. But Thompson and Mitchell hadn't reached the same conclusion. If anything, the military paraphernalia seemed to make them more suspicious, not less. "Mitchell," Thompson called out, "we've got multiple individuals with military items. Might be stolen valor or something else going on." Maria watched as Mitchell approached the group with the kind of heightened alertness usually reserved for genuine security threats. The veterans, for their part, remained calm and cooperative, answering questions politely and following instructions without complaint. But she could see the tension building in their faces, the way their jaws tightened slightly as they realized they were being viewed as potential criminals rather than former service members. The tall man who had been first in line caught her eye for a moment, and she saw something there that made her heart skip. It wasn't anger or resentment, though he would have been justified in feeling both. It was disappointment. The kind of deep, weary disappointment that comes from being judged by appearances rather than character, from being seen as a threat rather than someone who had once stood ready to defend the very people who were now treating him with suspicion. "We're going to need to do additional screening," Mitchell announced to the group. "Please gather your belongings and move to the secondary inspection area." As the veterans collected their few possessions and moved toward the additional screening station, Maria noticed other passengers in the terminal beginning to take notice. Some stared openly, others whispered among themselves, and a few pulled out their phones to record what they clearly assumed was some kind of security incident. The veterans maintained their dignity throughout the process, but Maria could see the toll it was taking. These were people who had already endured more than most civilians could imagine, and now they were being subjected to public humiliation simply because their appearance didn't match what people expected from air travelers. What none of them knew, not Maria, not Mitchell, not Thompson, and certainly not the veterans themselves, was that someone else had been watching the entire scene unfold. Someone who understood exactly what he was seeing and who was about to change everything. General Robert Harrison had been sitting in the airport restaurant, quietly enjoying his morning coffee and reviewing briefing documents when a commotion at the TSA checkpoint caught his attention. At 62, Harrison was a decorated career military officer who had served for over 4 decades, rising through the ranks to become one of the most respected leaders in the United States Army. He was traveling in civilian clothes, as was his preference when not on official business, but his bearing and awareness never truly left military mode. From his vantage point near Gate 15, he had a clear view of the security checkpoint, and what he saw made his blood pressure rise steadily. 20 veterans. He recognized them immediately for what they were being treated like common criminals by TSA personnel who clearly had no understanding of what they were dealing with. Harrison had seen enough combat and enough of military life to read the signs that the TSA officers were missing. The way the veterans formed loose ranks without being asked, the way they maintained eye contact and showed respect even under suspicion, the careful way they handled their few possessions. These weren't the behaviors of troublemakers or threats. These were the actions of people who had been trained to follow orders, respect authority, and maintain discipline even in difficult circumstances. But what truly caught his attention was the subtle body language that spoke of recent hardship. He recognized the signs of homelessness, the carefully maintained cleanliness despite limited resources, the way they held onto their possessions as if they contained everything important in the world, the quiet resignation in their faces that came from being judged constantly by their appearance rather than their character. The general set down his coffee cup with deliberate care and continued watching as the situation escalated. TSA Supervisor Mitchell was now treating the screening like a major security investigation, calling for additional officers and moving the veterans to a secondary screening area where they would be subjected to more invasive searches and questioning. "This is unacceptable," Harrison muttered under his breath, his training and instincts warring with his natural inclination to avoid creating scenes in public places. But as he watched one of the female veterans, a young woman who couldn't be more than 25, being subjected to an aggressive pat-down while other passengers openly stared and recorded with their phones, his decision was made. General Harrison stood up, his 6'2" frame and natural command presence immediately noticeable even in civilian clothes. He walked purposefully toward the security checkpoint, his military bearing becoming more pronounced with each step. Years of leading troops in combat and peace had taught him that sometimes the most important battles were fought not with weapons, but with the simple assertion of moral authority. "Excuse me," Harrison said, his voice carrying the kind of quiet authority that made everyone in the immediate area turn toward him. "I'm General Robert Harrison, United States Army. What seems to be the problem here?" Mitchell looked up from his tablet, his expression showing confusion and irritation at the interruption. "Sir, this doesn't concern you. Please return to the passenger area while we conduct our security screening." "Actually, it does concern me," Harrison replied calmly. "These are United States military veterans, and they appear to be receiving treatment that is both inappropriate and disrespectful. I'd like to know what security threat they're supposed to represent." The tall veteran who had been first in line looked at Harrison with surprise and something that might have been hope. "Sir, we don't want to cause any trouble. We're just trying to get to Washington for a memorial service." Harrison nodded to the veteran, recognizing the automatic respect and proper military bearing in his response. "What's your name, soldier?" "Marcus Webb, sir. Sergeant, 101st Airborne. Served 2 tours in Afghanistan." Webb's posture straightened slightly as he spoke, years of military training taking over. "And the rest of your group?" "All veterans, sir. We're traveling together to attend a memorial for our friend Tommy Rodriguez. He was killed by an IED 3 years ago, and his family is finally holding a service at Arlington National Cemetery." The words hit Harrison like a physical blow. These veterans weren't just traveling together. They were honoring a fallen comrade, making what was probably a significant financial sacrifice to attend a memorial service. And they were being treated like criminals for their efforts. Harrison turned to Mitchell, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of 4 decades of military command. "Supervisor Mitchell, I want you to listen very carefully. These men and women have served our country with honor and distinction. They have earned the right to travel with dignity, not to be subjected to harassment and public humiliation. Sir, I understand your concern, but we have protocols," Mitchell began, but Harrison cut him off with a look that had once silenced a room full of Pentagon brass. "Your protocols are being misapplied," Harrison said firmly. "I've been watching this situation unfold for the past 20 minutes, and I haven't seen a single action that would justify the treatment these veterans are receiving. What I have seen is a group of Americans who serve their country being profiled based on their appearance and economic status. By now, the confrontation had attracted significant attention. Other passengers had stopped to watch, some recognizing the authority in Harrison's voice and bearing even if they didn't know his rank or position. Several were recording the interaction with their phones, and Harrison was aware that whatever happened next would likely be shared widely on social media. Maria Santos, who had been watching the entire situation with growing discomfort, stepped forward. "Sir, if I may, these gentlemen and ladies have been completely cooperative throughout the screening process. They've followed all instructions and answered all questions politely." Harrison nodded to her with approval. And what exactly has triggered this enhanced screening? Mitchell shifted uncomfortably under Harrison's steady gaze. They purchased separate tickets, but are traveling together. They appear to be of limited financial means, and several are carrying military paraphernalia that could be what? Harrison interrupted. Evidence that they served their country? Since when is being poor and being a veteran cause for suspicion in America? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Around them, other passengers were beginning to murmur among themselves, and Harrison could see the shift in public opinion. What had started as curiosity about a potential security incident was transforming into recognition that something fundamentally wrong was taking place. Sergeant Webb stepped forward slightly. "General, sir, we appreciate your intervention, but we don't want to cause problems for these folks. They're just doing their jobs." Harrison looked at Webb with the kind of recognition that passes between military personnel, the understanding of shared service and sacrifice. "Son, part of my job as a general officer is ensuring that the people who served under my flag are treated with the respect they've earned. And right now, that's not happening." He turned back to Mitchell with the kind of expression that had once made enemy commanders reconsider their tactical positions. "Supervisor, I'm going to ask you one more time. What specific security concerns justify the treatment these veterans are receiving?" Mitchell looked around nervously, suddenly, aware that the situation had spiraled far beyond his control. The other passengers were clearly on the veteran's side. His own officers looked uncomfortable with the proceedings, and he was facing down a general officer who obviously knew exactly what was happening and wasn't backing down. We were just following standard enhanced screening procedures," Mitchell said weakly. "Based on what criteria?" Harrison pressed. "Their appearance? Their economic status? The fact that they're veterans? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're punishing these people for their service to our country." The silence that followed was deafening. In that moment, everyone present understood that they were witnessing something more significant than a simple airport security screening. They were seeing the fundamental question of how America treats its veterans played out in real time, in front of dozens of witnesses with cameras. The tension at Gate 17 was thick enough to cut with a knife as General Harrison waited for Supervisor Mitchell's response. Around them, the normal bustle of airport activity had ground to a halt as passengers and airport personnel alike recognized they were witnessing something extraordinary. Cell phone cameras captured every moment, and Harrison was acutely aware that the next few minutes would determine whether this situation ended with dignity restored or further humiliation for the veterans. Mitchell's face had gone pale as he realized the gravity of his situation. Not only was he facing criticism from a general officer, but he was doing so in front of dozens of witnesses who were clearly sympathizing with the veterans. His radio crackled with chatter from other TSA personnel who had heard about the confrontation and were asking for updates. "Sir," Mitchell said, his voice noticeably less confident than before, "we were just following our enhanced screening protocols. When we see individuals who don't fit typical passenger profiles—" "Stop right there," Harrison said, his voice cutting through Mitchell's explanation like a blade. "What you just described is profiling, pure and simple. You're treating these veterans as suspects because they don't look like your idea of typical passengers." One of the female veterans, a woman in her 30s named Sarah Chun, stepped forward with quiet dignity. "General, sir, may I say something?" Harrison nodded, recognizing the proper military courtesy in her request. "Of course, soldier. I'm Staff Sergeant Sarah Chun, sir. Army medic, served 3 tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. I want you to know that we understand these folks are just doing their jobs. We don't want anyone to get in trouble because of us." Her words carried the weight of genuine concern, but Harrison could see past the diplomatic response to the hurt in her eyes. This was a woman who had saved lives under enemy fire, who had risked everything for her country, and she was being forced to defend TSA personnel who had treated her like a criminal. "Staff Sergeant Chun," Harrison said formally, "you and your fellow veterans have nothing to apologize for. The question isn't whether these officers are doing their jobs. It's whether they're doing their jobs correctly and with the respect that American veterans deserve. Maria Santos, who had been watching the entire exchange with growing admiration for both Harrison's intervention and the veteran's dignity, stepped forward. "Sir, if I may, I've been observing this group since they arrived, and their behavior has been exemplary. They've been polite, cooperative, and respectful throughout the entire process." Harrison nodded to her with approval. "And what's your assessment of the security risk they represent, officer?" "Santos, sir. Maria Santos. In my professional opinion, these individuals represent no security threat whatsoever. They're clearly traveling together for a legitimate purpose. They've been cooperative and transparent, and their documentation is all in order." The general's attention turned back to Mitchell. "So we have a group of veterans traveling to honor a fallen comrade. They've been completely cooperative, their documents are in order, and one of your own officers sees no security risk. What am I missing, Supervisor?" Before Mitchell could respond, a new voice joined the conversation. "What you're missing is common sense and basic human decency." Everyone turned to see who had spoken. It was an elderly man in his 70s, wearing a well-worn baseball cap with Vietnam veteran embroidered on it. He had been watching the entire scene from nearby chairs, and his weathered face showed a mixture of anger and recognition. "My name is Frank Morrison," the man said, his voice carrying the raspy tone of someone who had seen too much and wasn't afraid to speak his mind. "I served 2 tours in Vietnam with the Marine Corps, and I know what these young folks are going through." Morrison walked slowly toward the group, his slight limp evidence of old wounds that had never fully healed. "I've been sitting over there watching you people treat these veterans like they're criminals, and I'm disgusted. These men and women put their lives on the line for this country, and this is how we repay them." The old Marine's words carried across the terminal, and Harrison could see other passengers beginning to pay attention. Some were nodding in agreement. Others were pulling out their phones to record what was clearly becoming a significant confrontation. Furthermore, Morrison continued, "I've been homeless myself. Lost my job, lost my house, lived on the streets for 8 months before the VA finally got me into a program that helped me get back on my feet. I know what it's like to be judged by how you look instead of who you are." His words hit the veterans like a physical blow. Several of them straightened their postures, and Harrison could see the recognition in their eyes. They weren't just dealing with discrimination. They were dealing with someone who understood their situation from personal experience. Sergeant Webb stepped forward. "Sir, thank you for speaking up. You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did," Morrison replied firmly. "Because if we don't stand up for each other, who will?" Harrison seized on Morrison's intervention to refocus attention on the core issue. "Supervisor Mitchell, you've now heard from a general officer, one of your own TSA agents, and a veteran who has direct experience with homelessness. All of us are telling you the same thing. This enhanced screening is inappropriate and discriminatory." Mitchell looked around desperately, clearly hoping for some kind of backup or guidance from his superiors. His radio continued to crackle with chatter, but no help was forthcoming. He was on his own, facing down a coalition of military personnel and growing public opposition. I need to contact my supervisor," Mitchell said weakly. "No," Harrison said firmly. "You need to make a decision right now. Either you have legitimate security concerns that justify this treatment, or you don't. Which is it?" The question hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown down. Around them, the crowd of passengers continued to grow, and Harrison could see airline personnel beginning to take notice of the situation. This was rapidly becoming a public relations nightmare for both the TSA and the airport. Officer Thompson, who had been largely silent during the confrontation, suddenly stepped forward. "Supervisor, sir, I think we should let them through. They've been cooperative, their documents check out, and we haven't found anything suspicious." Mitchell turned to Thompson with a look of betrayal, but the younger officer stood his ground. "Sir, I joined the TSA to help protect travelers, not to harass veterans who are traveling to honor their fallen comrades." The statement was a clear repudiation of Mitchell's approach, and it came from one of his own officers. Harrison could see the supervisor's authority crumbling in real time, undermined by his own poor judgment and the mounting opposition from every quarter. "There's something else you should know," Harrison said, his voice carrying across the terminal. "I'm not just any general. I'm General Robert Harrison, and I've spent the last 5 years working with veteran advocacy groups to address homelessness and transition issues among former service members." The announcement sent a ripple of recognition through the crowd. Harrison was known in military circles for his work with veterans, and his name carried significant weight with anyone familiar with veteran affairs. "These veterans you're treating like criminals? They represent hundreds of thousands of men and women who served our country and are now struggling to find their place in civilian society. How we treat them says everything about who we are as Americans." The revelation of General Harrison's identity and his work with veteran advocacy sent shockwaves through the terminal. Passengers who had been watching the confrontation with curiosity now understood they were witnessing something of national significance. Cell phone videos were already being uploaded to social media, and Harrison could see airport security personnel hurrying toward the scene. But before anyone else could intervene, something unexpected happened. A woman in a business suit approached the group, her airline employee badge identifying her as Rebecca Walsh, terminal manager. She had been monitoring the situation from the airline operations center and had made the decision to intervene directly. "General Harrison," Walsh said, extending her hand professionally. "I'm Rebecca Walsh, terminal manager for this facility. I want to apologize on behalf of Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport for what these veterans have experienced today." Harrison shook her hand, recognizing a fellow professional who understood the gravity of the situation. "Ms. Walsh, I appreciate your intervention, but the apology needs to come with action." "Absolutely, sir," Walsh replied. "First, I want to ensure that these veterans are allowed to proceed to their gate with no further delays or harassment. Second, I'd like to personally escort them to ensure they receive the treatment they deserve." Supervisor Mitchell started to object. "Ma'am, we still haven't completed our enhanced screening procedures." "The enhanced screening is over," Walsh said firmly, cutting him off. "These passengers will proceed through normal security protocols only. Is that understood?" The terminal manager's authority was absolute, and Mitchell had no choice but to comply. But Harrison could see the resentment in the supervisor's eyes, and he knew this wasn't over. Staff Sergeant Chun stepped forward again. "Ma'am, we appreciate your help, but we don't want special treatment. We just want to be treated fairly." Walsh nodded with respect. "Sergeant, fair treatment is exactly what you're going to receive. But I also want you to know that this airport honors your service, and we're going to make sure you get to your destination with the dignity you've earned." As the veterans began collecting their belongings and preparing to proceed through security, Harrison noticed something remarkable happening. Other passengers throughout the terminal had begun to take notice of who these people really were. Instead of staring with suspicion, people were now approaching the veterans with respect and gratitude. A young mother with 2 small children walked up to Sergeant Webb. "Excuse me, sir, but I heard your veterans traveling to honor a fallen comrade. I just wanted to thank you for your service." An elderly couple approached Staff Sergeant Chun. "We heard what happened here," the man said, "and we wanted you to know that not everyone thinks this way. Our sons serve in Afghanistan too, and we know what you've been through." More passengers joined in, and what had started as a humiliating experience for the veterans was transforming into something entirely different. Harrison watched with satisfaction as the public support grew, knowing that this was exactly the kind of recognition these men and women deserved. But the most significant moment came when Frank Morrison, the Vietnam veteran who had first spoken up, approached the group with tears in his eyes. "I need to tell you all something," Morrison said, his voice shaking slightly. 45 years ago, when I came home from Vietnam, people spat on me at this same airport. They called me baby killer and worse. I swore that day that if I ever saw veterans being mistreated, I would speak up." The old Marine's words carried incredible weight, and Harrison could see the impact they had on everyone present. This wasn't just about one incident at an airport security checkpoint. It was about how America treats its veterans across generations. You young folks deserve better than what happened here today, Morrison continued. But, more importantly, you deserve better than what's waiting for you when you get home. Too many of us come back from war and get forgotten by the country we served. Sergeant Webb stepped forward and did something that surprised everyone. He stood at attention and saluted the old Marine with crisp military precision. "Sir, thank you for speaking up for us. It means more than you know." The salute was returned with equal precision, and suddenly every veteran in the group was standing at attention, saluting each other in a moment of recognition and respect that transcended the decades between their service. Harrison felt a lump form in his throat as he watched the impromptu ceremony. This was why he had intervened, not just to stop discriminatory treatment, but to restore the dignity and recognition that these veterans deserved. Terminal Manager Walsh watched the exchange with obvious emotion. "General, I want you to know that this incident will be thoroughly investigated. Changes will be made to ensure this doesn't happen again." "I appreciate that," Harrison replied. "But I hope you understand that this isn't just about TSA procedures. This is about how we treat veterans throughout our society." "You're absolutely right," Walsh said. "And I want you to know that DFW Airport is going to partner with veteran organizations to develop better training for all our personnel. We're also going to create a veteran recognition program to ensure that service members are honored when they travel through our facility." The commitment was more than Harrison had expected, and he could see the impact it had on the veterans. For the first time since the incident began, he saw genuine smiles on their faces. But the most important moment came when Officer Maria Santos approached the group. She had been watching the entire confrontation with growing understanding of what had really happened. "I want to apologize," Santos said, addressing the veterans directly. "I should have spoken up sooner. I could see that you were being treated unfairly, and I should have done something about it." "Officer Santos," Harrison interjected, "you did speak up when it mattered. You told the truth about what you observed, and that took courage." "Thank you, sir, but I want to do more," Santos replied. "I'm going to file a formal report about this incident, and I'm going to recommend additional training for all TSA personnel on how to respectfully interact with veterans." Her commitment was genuine, and Harrison could see that at least one good thing would come from this difficult situation: a TSA officer who truly understood the importance of treating all passengers with dignity and respect. As the veterans finally proceeded through the security checkpoint without further incident, Harrison reflected on what had just occurred. A situation that had started with discrimination and disrespect had transformed into something remarkable, a demonstration of what Americans could accomplish when they stood up for what was right. But he also knew that the real test would come in the follow-up. Would the promises made today result in actual changes, or would this become just another forgotten incident? The answer to that question would determine whether this confrontation had any lasting meaning. 3 months after the confrontation at Gate 17, the ripple effects were still being felt throughout Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport and beyond. General Robert Harrison sat in his Pentagon office, reviewing a comprehensive report that documented the extraordinary changes that had emerged from that September morning. The incident, captured on multiple cell phone cameras and widely shared on social media, had sparked a national conversation about how America treats its veterans. The hashtag #Gate17Veterans had trended on Twitter for weeks, generating millions of views and thousands of stories from veterans who had experienced similar discrimination. But more importantly, real changes have been implemented. Harrison reviewed the report with satisfaction, noting that DFW Airport had become a model for veteran-friendly policies nationwide. Terminal Manager Rebecca Walsh had kept every promise she made that day. The airport had partnered with the Veterans Administration and multiple veteran advocacy groups to develop comprehensive training programs for all personnel. TSA agents, airline employees, and airport security staff now received specific education on recognizing and properly assisting veterans, particularly those dealing with homelessness or transition challenges. The airport had also established a veterans recognition program that provided priority boarding, special assistance, and dedicated support services for traveling service members and veterans. Most remarkably, they had created a memorial wall honoring local veterans, with Tommy Rodriguez's name prominently displayed among the hundreds of others who had made the ultimate sacrifice. Officer Maria Santos had become something of a hero within the TSA community. Her formal report on the incident had led to a comprehensive review of screening procedures, and she had been promoted to a supervisory position with special responsibility for veteran affairs training. Her courage in speaking truth to authority had established her as a leader within the organization. Supervisor James Mitchell, on the other hand, had faced significant consequences for his handling of the situation. After a thorough investigation, he had been reassigned to a position with no supervisory authority and required to complete extensive training on civil rights and anti-discrimination policies. The incident had become a case study in how not to handle security screening situations. But perhaps the most significant changes had occurred in the lives of the veterans themselves. Sergeant Marcus Webb had used the national attention from the incident to launch a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping homeless veterans access services and support. The organization, called Gate 17 Veterans, had already helped more than 200 former service members find housing and employment. Staff Sergeant Sarah Chun had been recruited by the Department of Veterans Affairs to help develop new outreach programs for female veterans. Her experience and insights had proven invaluable in creating services specifically designed to address the unique challenges faced by women who had served in combat roles. Even Frank Morrison, the Vietnam veteran whose words had helped turn the tide of public opinion, had found new purpose in his retirement years. He had become a volunteer advocate with several veteran organizations, using his story and experience to help bridge the gap between different generations of service members. The memorial service for Tommy Rodriguez had taken place as planned, but it had been attended by far more than the original 20 veterans. Hundreds of people, inspired by the story of their journey, had come to Arlington National Cemetery to honor his service and show support for his surviving comrades. The ceremony had been covered by national media, ensuring that Rodriguez's sacrifice would not be forgotten. Harrison's phone buzzed with an incoming call from Rebecca Walsh. She had become a regular contact as they worked together to expand the veteran-friendly initiatives to other airports across the country. "General, I wanted to give you an update on our latest numbers," Walsh said, her voice filled with pride. "We've now assisted over 1,500 veterans through our Special Services program, and we've had 0 incidents of discriminatory treatment since implementing the new training." "That's outstanding, Rebecca," Harrison replied. "But more importantly, how are the veterans responding to the changes?" "The feedback has been incredible, sir. We're getting letters and emails every week from veterans thanking us for treating them with dignity and respect. Many say it's the first time they felt truly welcomed at an airport." Harrison smiled, remembering the dignity and grace the original 20 veterans had shown throughout their ordeal. "They deserve nothing less than our best efforts." "There's something else, General," Walsh continued. "The story has inspired other industries to examine their own treatment of veterans. Hotels, restaurants, and retail establishments across the country are implementing similar training programs. The impact is going far beyond airports." This was exactly what Harrison had hoped for: systemic change that would improve life for veterans across all sectors of society. But he knew there was still more work to be done. "Rebecca, I want you to know that your leadership has been instrumental in making all of this happen. You didn't have to step in that day, but you chose to do the right thing." "Thank you, sir, but honestly, after watching those veterans maintain their dignity throughout that horrible experience, I knew I couldn't stand by and do nothing. They showed me what real character looks like." After ending the call, Harrison reflected on the lessons learned from that September morning at Gate 17. A group of veterans traveling to honor a fallen comrade had been subjected to discriminatory treatment, but their response had demonstrated the very qualities that made them heroes in the first place: dignity, grace under pressure, and concern for others even when they were being mistreated. The incident had also revealed something important about American society. When confronted with clear injustice, ordinary citizens had stood up and demanded better. Passengers, airport employees, and even TSA officers had recognized that something wrong was happening and had chosen to speak out. Most importantly, the story had shown that positive change was possible when people of good will work together toward common goals. The transformation of DFW Airport's veteran services hadn't happened overnight, but it had happened because people committed themselves to making things better. Harrison picked up his phone and dialed a familiar number. Sergeant Webb answered on the second ring. "Marcus, it's General Harrison. I want to check in and see how the nonprofit is progressing." "General, sir, it's going better than we ever imagined," Webb replied, his voice filled with enthusiasm. "We've got funding from 3 major corporations now, and we're opening our second transitional housing facility next month." "That's outstanding, son. You've turned a negative experience into something that's helping hundreds of your fellow veterans." "Sir, if I may say so, none of this would have happened without your intervention that day. You didn't have to step in, but you chose to stand up for us when we needed it most." Harrison was quiet for a moment, thinking about the courage it had taken for those 20 veterans to make the trip to honor their fallen comrade, despite their difficult circumstances. "Marcus, you and your fellow veterans stood up for this country when it needed you most. The least I could do was return the favor." "Well, sir, I hope you know that we'll never forget what you did for us that day." As Harrison ended the call, he thought about the true meaning of the Gate 17 incident. It wasn't just about airport security or veteran services. It was about the fundamental promise that America makes to its service members. When young men and women raise their right hands and swear to defend the Constitution, the country promises to take care of them when they return. For too long, that promise had been broken for too many veterans. But the events at Gate 17 had shown that it was possible to restore dignity, respect, and support for those who had sacrificed so much in service to their nation. The story had started with 20 veterans being called junk by TSA personnel. It had ended with systemic changes that would benefit thousands of veterans for years to come. And in between, it had demonstrated the power of moral courage, public accountability, and the simple recognition that every person deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. General Harrison looked out his Pentagon window at the American flag flying proudly in the distance. He thought about Tommy Rodriguez, whose memorial service had brought together the 20 veterans in the first place. Rodriguez had died defending American values in Afghanistan, and in a very real sense, his memory had inspired a renewal of those same values at home. The young soldier's sacrifice had not been in vain. His legacy lived on in the changes that had emerged from that September morning at Gate 17, ensuring that future generations of veterans would receive the recognition and respect they had earned through their service to America.